Hi, welcome to My Comic Crush. I'm Vickie Sebring, and I love comics. So let's dive into a long box and see what we find. With me this week is my co-host Scott Sebring.
Hello, everybody.
And this week we are going to be talking Tigra. Now, maybe not the Tigra you're familiar, because we're going to go way back to Marvel Chillers from February through October of 1976. I mean, this is like her first real multi-issue solo story. She's not totally solo, but she is the headliner. And this is her first real outing as Tigra. For those of you who don't know, Tigra is Greer Grant Nelson, the widow of policeman Bill Nelson, and originally she was the Cat, seen in the Claws of the Cat miniseries back in 1972. Also, she did a Marvel team-up as the Cat with Spider-Man, and not to be confused with Hellcat. Hellcat is Patsy Walker. Now, Patsy is wearing the same suit as the Cat was wearing. However, she found an old suit of the Cat's and put it on and became Hellcat.
I was familiar with Patsy Walker in the Defenders.
Patsy Walker from the Defenders, but, well, actually, seeing Patsy Walker on a Defenders cover is what actually first made me pick up an issue of Defenders, because I'm like, oh, it's the Cat. It wasn't. Even though I knew the hair color was wrong, who knew? I'm like, it's the Cat. It wasn't. Patsy's a redhead. Greer had black hair. Tigra has orange hair. All over. Also, however, not to be confused with the evil the Cat, Shirley Bryant.
I'm not familiar with that one.
That's because you haven't read the Claws of the Cat miniseries. Dude, you're slacking.
We haven't done a podcast on that one yet.
We'll get there. But dude, you're slacking. Back in the original appearance of the Cat, which was the miniseries The Claws of the Cat in 1972, Greer was the assistant of Professor Dr. Joanne Tremolo. Let's go with Tremolo.
I love tremolos on guitars, yes.
We'll go with Tremolo, who was her old physics professor from the University of Chicago. She went to work for her when her husband was killed. Dr. Tremolo was working on an experiment that was being funded by some doodah to try and bring women to their ultimate potential. Now, the original intended recipient for this process was Shirley Bryant, who was a flunky of the guy funding the experiment, who had intentions of using her for nefarious purposes.
Nefarious purposes,
mainly things to make him money in underhanded ways. However, at the same time Dr. Tremolo is doing this process on Shirley, she's doing the same thing on Greer. Greer actually takes to it a lot better and eventually winds up becoming the Cat. Shirley was also the Cat because the Cat outfits were part of the experiment. They were designed to be an amplification tool for this process for the wearer who had undergone the process as well. So both Shirley and Greer were eventually in those suits, only Shirley didn't come out so well. Greer had her career as the Cat throughout the series Claws of the Cats. She also did Marvel Team-Up number 8 with Spider-Man. Woohoo! And we don't see her again until we come up on Giant-Sized Creatures number 4 and Werewolf of the Night number 20. Now, this is a two-parter story that was in 2 different issues, 2 different comics, but this is where Greer becomes Tigra. Yeah, this is where you first wind up with Tigra. This is what happens. This is the process. Basically, she was mortally injured by Hydra, those evil bastards.
Hydra.
Bad, juju, bad. No liking the Hydra. And in order to save her life, Dr. Tremolo revealed herself to be one of a secret race of cat people, and in order to save Greer, she offered to use a special process that combined science, mysticism, and psychic abilities of the cat people to transform her into one of them. and she wound up being turned into Tigra to save her life.
Now, from there, does that bring us into where we find her at the beginning of Marvel's Chillers, or at least the beginning of her story, Marvel Chillers?
Not quite. There was a small story with Tigra in Monsters Unleashed number 10, February 1975. It was just a little black and white story featuring her, but this is her first real big adventure as Tigra, where she's the main headlining character. It's multi-issue. She's going up against some pretty big, powerful people here in different issues here. It's a little choppy, I have to say, because...
Which we can probably get into that aspect of it, but let's go ahead, because how many issues was this run? About 5 issues?
It was 5 issues. It was Marvel Chillers number 3 through 7, February through October of 1976. So that's 5 issues. And Marvel Chillers ended when this storyline ended. Number 7 was the last issue of Marvel Chillers. It did not last very long.
That also kind of makes sense to me in regards that the Marvel monster phase that they went through it slightly in the earlier 70s with Frankenstein, the werewolf, and Tomb of Dracula, though Tomb of Dracula still carried on a bit longer, that kind of slowly phased out by that time. So I could see where something like Marvel Chillers faded out.
There was a bit of a shift around this period of time as to what was really most popular and what was selling. And Marvel Chillers was canceled due to lack of poor sales.
But that's just also like when Marvel went through their Kung Fu phase, when the Kung Fu thing was really big in the 74 and onward from there, that you got things, well, Kung Fu, and we had monsters, we had Kung Fu, and by the end of the 70s, almost both of those faded out.
Well, which is just like kind of what you see in the 80s, when both the X-Men and the New Teen Titans were so big, suddenly you saw an upswing in various team books. Team books were hot because the X-Men and the New Teen Titans were some of the hottest selling books at the time. So you saw more team books suddenly come to the fore and be introduced.
I'm just curious, what were some of the teen books that you're talking about?
Well, you had Batman and the Outsiders that came out during that period in time. Power Pack. Hey, I read it. It wasn't too bad. You know, we can take this up later. You had the New Mutants, who came out in the 80s, who were a spin-off group of the X-Men. Eventually, you also had X-Factor, another X-Men team, which was an attempt to reboot the original classic X-Men. And in the infamous Marvel New Universe, I was there. It wasn't that bad. You had Cyforce. I'm not saying that everything suddenly became a team book, but you did see more team titles out there because of the popularity of the X-Men and the New Teen Titans, which were both awesome. And having said that word awesome, I want to take a moment to say the secret word for last podcast airing was awesome. For those of you who want to play along, try and figure out what this week's secret word is.
Now, folks might not understand what you mean by the secret word.
I've noticed I have a tendency to get locked on a word in a podcast and tend to repeat it a lot. So let's see if you can figure out what I think my mental hang-up word was next week.
It could be a phrase, and you knows, the, and, is, those don't count.
No, those don't count. Those are just sad. Anyways, just a fun little play-along because it amuses me. As I was saying, so you do see these shifts in the comic books. Sometimes, monster titles are big. Sometimes team titles are big. Sometimes it's the individual. Spider-Man's always big unless he's been cloned 20 million times.
We're not going there.
We're not going there, really. We are never going to go there. I may dig at it, but I ain't going in that closet. But anyways, back to Tigra. So this is probably why Marvel Chillers had such a short run. No offense meant to Tigra. It is not an indication of her awesomeness or not as a character, because she's pretty cool. I love Tigra. I've always loved Tigra since I first encountered her, and I was thrilled when I encountered her later in the West Coast Avengers. One of the primary reasons probably that I hung with that book is there were so many characters in that book that I really liked that I hadn't seen get such great exposure. But Marvel Chillers, this run, even though it's a little choppy,
That's going to put it mildly. Let's get into this aspect right out of the gate and think people will get a pretty good idea here. let's go through the lineup of the 5 issues because they don't have the same team on any one issue in a row.
No, there are some repeats through different issues, but it changes up. Okay, for issue number 3, which was titled Holocaust is Our Business, you had writer of Tony Isabella, artist of Will Mineo. Your inkers were Frank Chiamonte and Sam Granger. Your letterer was Joe Rosen, and your colorist was Peter Goldberg with the editor of the fabulous Marv Wolfman. Now, Marv was the editor for almost all the issues other than issue number 7. You did not have Marv as the editor on issue number 7. But on issue number 4, for the story Night is the Huntress, your writer was Chris Claremont, your artist was Frank Robbins, your inker was Vince Colletta.
Oh, God.
Sometimes known as Vinny.
We'll talk about Vinny in a moment.
Your letterer was Jay Costanza. Your colorist was G. Russos. Now, issue number 5, which was titled Cat and Mouse, you had, once again, Tony Isabella returning as writer, Will Mineo returning as artist, Vince Colletta still around as inker.
He ain't going away.
For letterers, you had credited D. Wall and Irv W. And then for colorist, Hugh Paley. And once again, Marv Wolfman sticking around through editor until the very last issue. Issue number 6, which was titled Soul Catcher. You still had Tony Isabella on as writer. You had John Byrne as the artist. Frank Springer is the inker. And maybe my very favorite letterer ever. I mean, I can't come. Yeah, this is just awesomeness. Tripled. Letterer I Wannabe. Man, I want to know the story behind that. I really do. Colorist D. Warfield. Editor, again, Marv Wolfman. For issue number 7, which was titled Mask of the Green Death, the credits are a little odd because the only person who gets a full name credit is the writer, Jim Shooter. Everybody else is just a first initial and a name, a last name. You've got the artist of G. Tusca, inker S. Trampani, letterer J. Costanza, colorist J. Cohen, and editor A. Goodwin. I don't really know why they have to abbreviate so much, but I guess space issues, or maybe by this point they're just like, we're not even trying.
Did it feel that way?
At least in the credits, it's like, who cares? This book's dead. We're not putting it on our resume. Anyways, but...
That's kind of how I felt by the end of the New Defenders.
Hey.
But that's another story.
I liked the New Defenders, although I'll give it to you that the ending was not the best.
Yeah, by the end.
Okay.
I was following it totally good by the end, but that's a whole other...
That's a whole nother podcast. I'm sure we'll get there. Anyways, so that's your teams on the various issues, and you can see, even though you do have some repeats, it gets lopped around here, there, and wherever, and you don't always feel like there's a overall, even though there is an overall story arc, sometimes you feel like this story just sort of got jammed in the middle of it. It's not the most fluid, cohesive story arc I've ever read. I mean, they're still good stories. There's lots of action and adventure and tons of stuff going on. They're still worth the read, but overall, the package of the 5 issues, for an overall arcing story, it could be better.
I think that's putting it mildly. It comes across very, very chopped. Very, very inconsistent. I dig the character Tigra. I dig some of where the story was initially going, and then they started changing the staff every issue, and the artwork went down. Sorry to say, the artwork for me just really went down, but that had more to do with Vince Colletta, known as Vinny. This guy, for those of you who don't know, he's probably my least favorite inker in the business who worked on so many wonderful comics. I'll put it that way. He was working in the big leagues, and I never understood why. Whenever an issue... This is my soapbox.
Go for it. I've gotten up on mine.
But whenever a comic was about to come to an end, I'd be reading it, looks great, reads great, and then the artwork takes a dip, and I look, and the penciler's still the same. but the inker's Vince Colletta, and then almost shortly after, the comic gets canceled. Vince wasn't good. It's as simple as that. He wasn't good. And the guy was known, how am I going to put this politely? I don't think some Goombas are going to knock on my door for this on a podcast.
Well, let's flash back to when we were talking about our adventures at San Diego Comic-Con. We mentioned we attended the 70s panel. Paul Galassi was on that panel, and he talked about an incident where apparently he had been less than flattering in some public comments about Vince Colletta's work on some of his work. And apparently Vinny had some Goombas who were looking for Paul to have a word.
Paul learned very quickly, you don't talk about Vinny.
Yeah, best just not to mention Mr. Vinny.
I think that's how Vinny stayed in the business as long as he did. When he was working on the Fantastic Four back in the early days of the Fantastic Four, I'm talking about within those first 50 issues or so, and I didn't understand it as a kid, where the leap happened for Jack Kirby and his art. But it's when Vince pretty much stopped inking his stuff. I come to find out later on that Vince even erased backgrounds, penciled backgrounds that Jack King Kirby had penciled these backgrounds and these details, and because Vince didn't want to bother inking this stuff, he erased them. Ladies and gentlemen, Vince Colletta.
Yeah.
And he was on this.
Yeah. On two issues. So, yeah.
I didn't even have to look at the credits. That when I went from the one issue right into the next and it got really flat, I go, oh, don't tell me Vince worked on this. And sure enough, he was there. I am now stepping down for the moment off my soapbox.
We are allowed soapbox time. I have my own soapboxes I hop up on frequently. So yeah, it's kind of choppy. But that said, you get some good stuff in there. I mean, you get Red Wolf. I mean, I have hardly ever come across Red Wolf. And if you haven't come across Red Wolf is a Native American Avenger.
With blue eyes.
With blue eyes, which threw me a bit when I saw that. I'm like, huh? But I can understand from an artistic point of view because he wears this big wolf head cowl thing. So you kind of need the blue eyes in there to make them sort of stand out in the shadows, as opposed to brown eyes would get kind of lost. So I can cut you a little slack there. But he's Cheyenne, and he is a member of the Avengers, although he's more of a part-timer. He has his wonderful wolf Lobo with him. And his real name, by the way, is William Talltrees. He is not the first character to be Red Wolf. Red Wolf is kind of a traditional title that is given to a Cheyenne protector who has been chosen by the Cheyenne Parthenon.
So it's more like a mantle.
It's more like a mantle that is occasionally worn. There have been different Red Wolves at different periods in the Marvel Universe history. But in this period, it is William Talltrees. And point of interest, Tigra is sort of a similar thing. Tigra, there have been other Tigras in the cat people's past, even though we may not have necessarily been exposed to them in the Marvel Universe adventures. But in the cat people history, there have been other females who have worn the mantle of Tigra, who is sort of a protector of the cat people. And also, while I'm talking about the cat people, I'm going to make a little point here, because for those of you who followed the West Coast Avengers, you were probably exposed to the second branch of the cat people, who were in the early Dark Ages when the cat people evolved through magic. They were imprisoned and banished into another dimensional limbo, except for a few who managed to escape and who started their own offshoot branch of the cat people here in our universe, the Marvel Universe, who lived secretly and were able to change their appearance to blend with humans. So there were two different branches of the cat people. They came from the same genesis, but they branched off. The ones who wound up in limbo, maybe not so nice.
So the ones in the other dimension were the ones that you were exposed to in the West Coast Avengers.
In the West Coast Avengers, and for a lot of people, that may be the only real cat people they've been exposed to. Now, I was exposed to them after having found Tigra in the Claws of the Cat, so I knew the other cat people, the branch that had been in our world living secretly and pretty much petered out. There wasn't a lot of them left.
They just kind of faded away.
They just kind of faded away, and they were a much nicer version of the cat people, which is probably why the other ones wound up being banished to limbo. Just saying.
Now, was the Claws of the Cat, was that your first exposure to Tigra in general, or was it West Coast Avengers and you had to backtrack?
No, I stumbled across her in a different book as Tigra, well before I ever came across her in any of the Avengers titles, West Coast or not. When I was thumbing through back issues, as I like to do at Star Comics, and I came across one with her on the cover, and I picked it up. And then I started actively looking for more stories with her, which at that point, she was not actively in the current lineup of the Avengers, although she was an Avenger. The West Coast Avengers title had not been launched yet. It wouldn't be for a while, so I wasn't getting her there. So I was trying to find her in different back issues, which is how I eventually stumbled across the Cat limited series and whatever else I could get my hands on with her. So I knew her back history well before I got into her in the current Marvel Universe, which was cool with me.
So that's how you actually found out about the Cat even.
Yes, that's how I found out about the Cat, the Marvel team up. I enjoyed the Cat. I enjoy the character of Tigra immensely. I enjoy Greer. Now, I have to say, one of the nice things about having read the Cat miniseries, The Claws of the Cat, and eventually the Marvel team up and further on where she eventually becomes Tigra, and then getting to see some of the adventures of her as Tigra, is you really do get to see Greer's progression as a person, her growth as an independent woman who can take care of herself. Because when she starts out in The Claws of the Cat, she's very helpless. She is a newly widowed young woman who's always had someone taking care of her. Her parents, her husband, and for the first time, she's on her own and having to learn to take care of herself and how to become very independent and assertive and deal with it. And she rises to the challenge magnificently. I love to see her blossom. I love to see her become confident, especially once she becomes Tigra. Once she becomes Tigra, she develops a whole nother level of confidence.
And a whole other level of hair.
She got some good big hair there. That's definitely some Raquel Welch hair that she is sporting in a lot of these issues.
That's like a late 60. I mean, funny that this came out like in 76 as far as the Chillers issues, but that hair just rings so far back to like Raquel Welch during like Fathom and Bandoleros and those sort of films.
That's some big hair, man. It's some big hair. She wears it well. But it's just really nice to see her blossom. Now, one of the interesting things that is very neat to see in this particular set of issues is the fact that since she's so new to being Tigra, she's really having a lot of trouble coming to terms with her dual nature, her cat self versus her human self. What's in control? What is she? Where is it? We are so early in her development here that she does not have the ability to transform, or at least to appear to transform into human. She is stuck permanently in the Tigra form. She has no way to pass as a normal human at all.
So she dresses to hide her Tigra-ness when trying to take a plane, for example.
Well, it's even mentioned that she's purposefully avoiding planes in this issue. They're doing a car trip because she didn't know that she could pass well enough to get through a plane ride, with a hat and gloves and all of that before somebody kind of looked at her and went, you look a little funny.
Yeah, maybe all that fur.
All that fur. Eventually, she will have the ability to appear to transform into a human using an amulet. It's not an actual physical transformation. She doesn't really, like a real were person would, be able to transform from human form physically to a were form. For her, it's an illusion that's cast where she looks and feels human, but really she's still Tigra underneath the illusion.
I want to bring up this little point. In these Chiller issues, she is advertised on the title of like the first werewoman. Now, I got to bring up a little technicality on here. Here's my fanboy forum moment, right? Now, if she was a were-woman, would that mean that she was a tiger turned into a woman? Rather than, because technically she'd be a were-cat or were-tiger.
Depending on your were mythology and where you're getting it from, most humans who turn into another animal form are considered weres. An animal who develops the were virus and transforms into a human is generally considered beastkin.
Oh.
At least depending on your individual writer. It's a little different. And that is obviously much rarer. Why? How many humans run around the forest biting animals? But yes, from an English standpoint, and maybe from a technical standpoint, it is a little misleading. She is not really a were-woman. She's not really aware because while she has been transformed into a cat person, she no longer has the ability to transform into a human, not physically. She can cast the illusion, but she cannot physically transform. She is not controlled by any cycles of the moon or solar or whatever. She's just that way. So technically, billing her as a were is a bit of a misnomer.
Well, anyway, that being said, who created Tigra, or rather, who created Greer, and then subsequently Tigra, because obviously it didn't happen at the same time.
Well, Greer Grant Nelson, a.k.a. the Cat, was created by Roy Thomas and Wally Wood, with possibly some input by Marie Severin. Worth noting, Red Wolf and Lobo were also created by Roy Thomas with John Buscema. Tigra, when Greer mutates into Tigra, is actually credited to Tony Isabella, who is the writer on a number of these issues.
There we go.
There we go. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of what you get in these issues, because
we could do that kind of briefly.
we could do that. Well, but it's worth noting because there's some big names here. Now, there's a main baddie by the name of Joshua Plague, who you might not have encountered before, and there's also some henchmen type baddies called the Rat Pack, who, if you're a reader of the classic Captain Marvel, not when he's in the white and the green, but when he's more in the red, black, and blue, you might have encountered the Rat Pack. They did have a few appearances in his issues. Also, you get Kraven the Hunter in issue number 4. And in the very last issue, which I guess they're going to throw the kitchen sink at you, you get the Super Skrull. I mean, the Super Skrull.
Super Skrull.
Super Skrull. I mean, you get a lot in there.
But getting from point A to point B to point C was a bit bumpy.
Is a bit bumpy. And for a little bit, you've got some of the classic Marvel misunderstandings going on between Red Wolf and Tigra. You know, good guys aren't sure who's good guys, who's bad guys. And you've also got this subplot that never seems to go anywhere with the cat people involving Tigra trying to find a way to turn herself into a human again, at least temporarily, as the cat people can do to help blend into society.
And that was brought up early on in the comic, like in the storyline. It was very early on. I thought that's what we were doing.
Well, right. That's part of the whole inception for the whole storyline was, you know, she's doing this road trip to go see this guy who hopefully can help her find a way to pass better when she needs to as a human. That was supposedly the whole reason for the car trip that brings her into this whole mess, where eventually she winds up going off on her own, totally abandoning the initial reason while she's there to try and, I don't know, vengeance, justice, who knows why.
I don't know if it was so much abandon as we just kind of never got back around to pursuing that.
No, you touch base once or twice more with Dr. Tumalo and one or two of the other cat people and one of Dr. Tumalo's old cronies, as it were. But you never really follow up on that storyline, which you thought was the original storyline you were following on. Instead, you sort of get derailed and sidetracked into this whole other thing with Joshua Plague and the Rat Pack. And for some reason, you get Kraven the Hunter thrown in there for an issue just which is like a whole nother story that doesn't seem to have any real input into the second story except for the flimsiest of links.
But now, who wrote that second story?
Chris Claremont. It's still good writing. It's just, as far as the overall arc goes, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, it seemed to be a handoff. Like, Tony was probably doing something else, and it's like, hey, Chris, can you do a story? Well, what were you doing? Wait a minute. I got something. I'm just going to put Craven because everything goes great with Craven.
Well, Tigra goes great with Craven. They are a good theoretical matchup when you Craven the Hunter, Tigra. Yeah, that's a good power play. Although I have to say I'd be much more interested in seeing it nowadays because, as I said, Tigra is really new back then. She's new to her abilities. She's new to her otherness. She's new to her duality and her nature. Eventually, she becomes a lot more competent and powerful and secure in who and what she is and her abilities. At this period, she's not so much there. So I think nowadays, a face-off between her and Craven would be so much more enjoyable because I think she would play with him like a mouse. She would be like, oh, little mousey, I'm going to bat you this way. I'm going to bat you that way. I'm going to pounce on you and then let you get away. And then you can chase me and I'll let you think you're chasing me. But really, I'm about to chase you. I'm chasing you by letting you chase me. I think that could be just fun. I'd buy that. I'd buy that.
Now, I don't think there's any trade paperbacks currently for this storyline, to my knowledge.
Not that I'm aware of. I've never seen one. If I'm wrong, whoa, great. But not that I'm aware of. You're going to have to dig through back issues to find this. And it can be done. They're out there. I found them. Granted, it was a while ago.
But even then, I don't know if I necessarily recommend this storyline as much as to round out your Tigra experience of her early days.
You know what? If you are a Tigra fan, if you're a Greer fan, and you really, really, really want to hunt these down, go for it. They're not bad. They're not horrible. They're just maybe not the best cohesiveness in all the stories. However, I do recommend that you hunt out and check out Claws of the Cat to really see the early days of Greer's origin.
But we'll go over that.
But we'll talk about that at another time. But yeah, you know what? I won't hold it against you if you don't hunt down Marvel chillers. I really won't. I enjoy them a lot, but
maybe you're just being a little bit more nostalgic of when you found these.
Well, I do get a lot of nostalgia for the old comics and the old days of my collection. I'm not going to deny that. I have a sentimental side.
Now, has Tigra ever had her own title? I mean, this wasn't even really her own title. This was her own spotlight, as it were. But has she ever had like her own title since?
She did have a Tigra miniseries. Not terribly long ago. I think that was more in the late 90s, but I could be mistaken. It could have been in the 2000s. So she did have her own miniseries. More recently, of course, there was her stint with the West Coast Avengers. Before that, she did some in and outs on the Avengers. And there was also Avengers Academy. She was very involved in the Avengers Academy book. But as far as her own Tigra title, the miniseries, I think, has really been it. Which I think is really kind of a shame, because I think she's a character who could definitely hold her own book. Of course, nowadays, modern times, she's got a kid. She's got a lot more things going on. So, who knows? The Marvel Universe and DC Universes nowadays are getting so etch-a-sketchy. Who knows where they'd go with it? However, I've always loved her as a character. I would really love to see her get more exposure, and especially her own book. I would love that.
Maybe Gail Simone should take...
Oh, I would be so down for Gail Simone to take Tigra and do a solo title with her. That would be freaking awesome. Are you kidding me? Yes. Give me that Kool-Aid. Yeah. Woo. Now you made me want things that I'm not going to get.
Well, just by putting it out there in the ether,
putting it out there
in the
universe, yes. Universe that be. We want Gail Simone to write Tigra. Woo, would you. Anyways, If you're a huge Tigra fan like I am, and you want to check out Marvel Chillers 3 through 7, check it out. If you're not that big of a Tigra fan to check out Marvel Chillers, you can still be a big enough fan to check out Claws of the Cat. But we'll leave it there. I really, really love Tigra, in case you didn't notice. I even enjoyed these particular adventures simply because, like I said, this is her beginnings. You really sort of see her trying to find her way, and some of the difficulties that she's running into, which do come up later on in her character, some of the issues that she had in the West Coast Avengers with her dual nature. You can sort of see the seeds planted here. And I always like to see where things begin. We're going to wrap it up here for now. Once again, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual places. And we always, always, always appreciate your feedback. Love to hear from you. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us if there's a character or storyline you'd like to hear us tap upon. We'd be happy to take that into consideration. Until next time, I'm Vickie Sebring.
And I'm Scott Sebring.
And this has been My Comic Crush. My Comic Crush is a production of Sebring Arts, executive producers Vickie Sebring and Scott Sebring, sound production and theme music by Scott Sebring, special guest provided by Blackmail and Shameless Baking. For more episodes in this series, you can visit our website at mycomiccrush.com or find us on iTunes, Podcast Republic, or wherever fine podcasts can be found. That's all for now, so go out and read something.